Hey, teacher, look. The janitor's feeding that hungry kid again, a student shouted across the schoolyard with a sneer. The elderly man didn't respond. He simply smiled, left the sandwich on the bench, and walked away without a word. Exactly 1 week later, the schoolyard fell into stunned silence as a group of Marines marched through the front gates, each one halting in perfect sync to offer a crisp salute. Who exactly was that quiet boy? And what had this unassuming janitor done to earn such a powerful tribute from the U.S. military? Welcome to Uncovered Tales. Let's dig into what really happened. Samuel Carter was 68 years old and had once served as a transport specialist in the U.S. Marine Corps during the final stretch of the Vietnam War. These days, the same hands that once gripped steering wheels now pushed a broom through the halls of Pinewood Elementary, a small school tucked into rural Arkansas. His military uniform had long been traded for faded gray coveralls. Since returning to civilian life, Samuel had spoken very little about his time in the service. He lived a quiet life in a modest apartment just 6 blocks from the school and walked to work every day, rain or shine, always carrying the same old lunchbox and offering students a warm, familiar smile. Teachers at Pinewood admired Samuel's consistency. He arrived before sunrise to make sure the sidewalks were safe, clearing snow in the winter, brushing away fallen leaves in autumn. His reliability was such a fixture that if he wasn't in the hallway by exactly 6:45 a.m., the principal would personally check in on him. What most didn't realize was that Samuel had a quiet ritual. Every morning, he would set aside a part of his own lunch, a sandwich some days, maybe fruit or a homemade cookie, and gently place it on the stone bench at the far end of the east playground. He never talked about it, and the staff had come to understand it wasn't something to question. That Tuesday had started like any other. Samuel showed up at 6:30, opened the maintenance closet, and got to work. By 7:15, he stood near the bench, holding his lunch bag. Nearby, a cluster of 5th graders gathered at the basketball court, noisier than usual as they waited for the bell. One of them noticed Samuel and nudged the others. "Look, the janitor's giving food to that poor kid again," the boy blurted out loud enough for half the playground to hear. A few kids snickered. Ms. Blake, the 4th grade teacher on duty, looked up from her clipboard with a disapproving glance. She took a step in their direction, uncertain how best to address it. Samuel didn't react. He wore the same calm expression he had while unclogging sinks or wiping up spilled juice boxes. With a polite nod toward Ms. Blake, he gently set down the sandwich and a bottle of water, then quietly turned and wheeled his cleaning cart toward the gym. The boy who received Samuel's daily gift was Leo, a 9-year-old in 4th grade with tired eyes and clothes that told their own story. His parents had recently split, which meant a string of new addresses and schools. While most of the kids brought lunches filled with snacks and handwritten notes, Leo's pockets usually held nothing more than a few stale crackers. Leo never asked for food. He didn't complain or try to get attention. He kept to himself, stayed focused on his assignments, and blended into the background. When the lunch bell rang, he'd say he wasn't hungry or that he'd forgotten his food at home. From the moment Leo arrived 3 months earlier, Samuel had made sure the boy never went through the school day on an empty stomach. They never exchanged a single word, just a quiet daily gesture, and a subtle nod from Leo when he thought no one was watching. Ms. Blake noticed. So did Principal Harris. But both chose to stay silent out of respect, sensing this unspoken understanding between the quiet custodian and a boy who needed more than textbooks and grades. None of them could have imagined that Samuel's simple act of kindness would eventually stop the entire school in its tracks. If you believe a shared glance and a sandwich can change a life, stay with us. Nobody really thought much of the fact that Leo was always the first to arrive at school. While other students trickled in at the last minute, Leo could be found perched on the front steps by 7 a.m., regardless of the weather, with a worn-out book in his hands. And Samuel was always the first to greet him. "How'd you sleep, kiddo?" he'd ask casually while sweeping the front walkway. Leo never answered out loud, just a small nod, or a shake of the head. Still, There was something in his eyes, something unspoken, that made it clear those early morning words meant more to him than he let on. But the morning after the teasing incident on the playground, Leo did something different. Instead of picking up the food and heading to his usual quiet spot, he walked up to the maintenance room during lunch and slid a small, folded piece of paper under the door. Then he disappeared before anyone could notice. Samu found the note later that day after fixing a leaking fountain. Written in neat, childlike handwriting were the words that made his calloused hands tremble. "Thank you for the sandwiches. My dad was a Marine too. I don't know if he's still alive, but you remind me of him." Samu sank down onto his old metal stool, his eyes unexpectedly glassy. Since his time in Vietnam, he'd taught himself how to keep his emotions locked away. But those few lines from a quiet boy, who had never spoken directly to him, cut through decades of hardened calm. The following morning, Samu took extra care packing lunch. He skipped the leftovers and instead made a fresh turkey sandwich on homemade bread. He added a polished apple, and 2 chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. Everything was carefully wrapped in wax paper, not the usual plastic bag. Leo discovered the upgraded lunch in its usual spot. There was something unmistakably thoughtful about the way it had been packed, so deliberate, so personal, that it brought tears to his eyes. He ate every last bite. That quiet meal marked the beginning of something far greater than either of them realized. Over the next few days, their routine continued, but with a gentle evolution. Now, whenever Leo caught sight of Samu across the playground, he'd offer a shy wave. In return, Samu would tap 2 fingers to his brow, a motion that landed somewhere between a salute and a tip of an invisible cap. No words passed between them, but the unspoken bond was growing stronger with each passing day. What no one else at Pinewood Elementary could see was that those modest meals were feeding far more than a growling stomach. For Leo, they became a lifeline, perhaps the only steady thing in a world that had recently unraveled. Then came Monday morning. Everything seemed ordinary at first. Students trickled in, classrooms filled with chatter, and the familiar hum of the school day began. Samuel was scrubbing away at a stubborn stain in the cafeteria floor when the overhead speaker crackled to life. "Mr. Carter, please report to the front entrance." Samuel paused, wiping his hands on a rag. In all his 15 years working at Pinewood, he could count on one hand how many times he'd been called during school hours. As he made his way down the hallway, a strange hush settled over the building. Students and teachers stood clustered near windows, frozen in place, their faces painted with surprise and curiosity. Outside, 4 sleek black SUVs sat idling in the fire lane, each one bearing government plates. In front of the main entrance stood 12 sharply dressed Marines, their posture flawless, their faces solemn and focused. Samu slowed his pace, his pulse quickening. The sharp symmetry of their formation, the shine of brass and pressed uniforms, something about it pulled him decades into the past, stirring instincts he hadn't felt since his time overseas. The Marine at the front, clearly the ranking officer, a captain, spotted Samu through the glass and gave a quiet command. Instantly, the men shifted to attention as one. Principal Harris approached him, confusion written all over her face. "Mr. Carter, do you have any idea what this is about?" Before he could respond, the captain entered the school, removed his cap, and spoke with formal clarity. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Alvarez of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. We're here to thank the person who's been looking after Sergeant Matthews's son." Samu stood frozen, still gripping the rag in his hand like it grounded him in the moment. "Sergeant Elijah Matthews gave his life during our deployment to Fallujah," Alvarez continued. "Before he went out on his final mission, he made us promise, if anything happened to him, we'd look after his boy. It took some time to locate the family after they moved," he added, "but recently, we learned someone here had quietly stepped in." Principal Harris turned to Samu, realization dawning slowly across her face. That someone would be Mr. Carter, our custodian. The captain studied Samu for a long moment, his eyes catching the quiet discipline that still lived in the older man's posture. "You served Samu gave a steady nod. Transport Division, 71 through 75. A flicker of understanding passed between the two men. Then you know what it means when Marines make a promise, Alvarez said with quiet conviction. Sergeant Matthews saved the lives of more than a few of us. Today, we're here to honor that promise, and to thank the man who stood in for us when we couldn't. The full weight of what was unfolding began to settle over Samuel like the slow drop of a memory finally surfacing. Leo, the quiet boy who rarely spoke, the one he'd fed for months without question, was the son of a fallen Marine. Every sandwich, every cookie, every bottle of water had not just been a meal. It had been a silent act of loyalty. A promise fulfilled to a brother in arms he'd never even met. Have you ever seen a simple, quiet act of goodness ripple outward until it stopped the world around it? Think of a time when a small kindness became something far greater. Because the truth that came next changed everything. Leo Matthews was indeed the son of Sergeant Elijah Matthews. But their connection ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Elijah hadn't just served in the Marines, he'd been part of the very same transport unit that Samu Carter helped build 4 decades earlier. Though they had never served side by side, they had worn the same crest, driven the same convoys, and followed the same protocols, procedures Samu himself had helped write during his deployment. Sergeant Matthews had died during a humanitarian evacuation. He'd used his vehicle to shield a group of civilians from gunfire, sacrificing himself to ensure their escape. He died behind the wheel, doing exactly what Samu had once trained young drivers to do, protect others at any cost. Leo's mother, Laura, had been crushed by the loss. With grief and mounting bills weighing heavily, she and Leo had moved from place to place for nearly a year. Their arrival in Pinewood wasn't random. It was the last town Elijah had written about in his final letter. If something ever happens to me, Elijah had written, take Leo to Pinewood. That's where you'll find good people, people who understand what it means to serve. At the time, Laura hadn't fully grasped why that small town mattered so much to her husband, only that he'd spoken of it with quiet conviction. Struggling under the weight of grief and the pressures of raising a child alone, she quietly filed for support through the VA. She never spoke of Elijah's service, not even to Leo. It felt like too much to explain, too soon. It was through those very records that Elijah's former unit eventually found them. Once they confirmed that Leo was enrolled at Pinewood Elementary, they began asking questions, discreetly. One school secretary casually mentioned the janitor who always made sure the boy had food. She had no idea her offhand comment would become the spark for everything that followed. As the morning unfolded, the halls of Pinewood filled with whispers and wide eyes. Teachers and students lined the corridors in silence, drawn toward the commotion at the school's front entrance. Captain Alvarez explained the situation to Principal Harris, who quickly made a decision. She canceled the day's lessons and called a full assembly in the gym. The Marines filed in and formed a line at the entrance. Each one stopped to salute as Samu entered the room, still dressed in his gray coveralls, entirely unaware he was walking into a ceremony held in his honor. Leo sat up front, his expression a mix of wonder and confusion, trying to understand why everyone was suddenly focused on him, and the man who'd been quietly leaving him lunch. Captain Alvarez stepped forward, his voice calm and steady, carrying clearly across the gym. 40 years ago, Corporal Samu Carter risked his life during the final evacuation of Saigon. He didn't wait for orders, he acted. He drove into enemy territory 3 separate times to pull stranded Marines to safety, navigating terrain others deemed impassable. Samu kept his eyes low, clearly uneasy in the spotlight he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. What many of you probably don't know, the captain continued, is that Corporal Carter developed the very transport protocols that Marine units still follow today. Those same rules helped guide Sergeant Matthews during his last mission. He turned and faced Leo directly. Your father, Leo, followed in the footsteps of the same man who's been quietly looking after you these past few months. 2 Marines, separated by time but bound by the same oath, never leave anyone behind. The connection felt almost too perfect, like something written by fate. A silent promise fulfilled without either of them knowing it. The son of a fallen Marine, cared for by the man who trained his father's unit. Laura had been invited to the event, though she wasn't told exactly why. She stood in the back, tears silently streaking her cheeks as realization washed over her. Elijah used to talk about Carter's rules, she later told the principal. I never made the connection until now. He always said they weren't just for driving, they were for life. Rule number 1, always check who's being left behind. When the formal presentation ended, Captain Alvarez stepped forward with a glass-fronted shadow box. Inside were Sergeant Matthews's service medals, his unit patch, and a photo of his team. In the background, just barely visible, was a poster tacked to the wall, Carter's rules for getting home alive. He carried this picture everywhere, the captain said softly. Said it reminded him of what really mattered. Leo approached slowly, eyes flicking between the photo and the man who'd been a quiet constant in his life. Did you know my dad? He asked in a small voice. Samuel knelt down, his knees creaking from years of wear. Not personally, son. But in the Marines, we're all connected. Your father and I, we followed the same path, just at different times. Leo hesitated. Mom said he was brave. Samuel gave a solemn nod. The bravest. Drivers always are. We go where no one else will, to make sure everyone else makes it home. When Laura finally reached her son, her face carried a storm of emotion, grief freshly reopened, deep gratitude, and a flicker of guilt. I should have told you who was helping him, she said quietly to Samuel. But I didn't know. I've been so overwhelmed. Samuel gave her a gentle smile. You don't owe me an explanation. A Marine's family is every Marine's responsibility. As the ceremony neared its close, Captain Alvarez stepped back to deliver one final surprise that left Samuel and the Matthews family speechless. The Marine Corps had created a scholarship in Sergeant Matthews's name, ensuring Leo's education would be fully paid through college. On top of that, a veteran support network had stepped in to provide housing assistance, securing a comfortable home for Laura and Leo just a couple of blocks from the school. We take care of our own, Alvarez said simply. Even if it takes time to find them. By the time students began filing back to their classrooms, the quiet ceremony had already made headlines. Word of what had happened spread fast, and before long, members of the media began showing up at the school. As soon as the ceremony ended, Samuel quietly slipped away to his maintenance room, clearly uneasy with the sudden spotlight. When Principal Harris found him, he was calmly organizing his tools, each wrench and screwdriver returned to its exact place, as if the morning had been just another Monday. They'd like to interview you, she said gently, her voice cautious. Samuel didn't even look up. That's not really my thing. Never has been. You've been here 15 years, she said, watching him work. And I had no idea you were a decorated Marine. He kept his focus on the toolbox, lining up a row of wrenches by size. There was never a reason to bring it up, he said. That part of my life, it's long behind me. Principal Harris took a step closer. But what you did, back then, and now, it matters. It deserves to be recognized. This time, he paused. He lifted his gaze slowly, his expression steady but thoughtful. Recognition isn't why you do things, he said. At least, not the things that really count. She studied him for a moment, this quiet man she thought she knew, who'd been quietly serving others in more ways than one. So why did you help Leo? She asked softly. You couldn't have known who his father was. Samuel's weathered face softened, his eyes distant with memory. First day I saw him, sitting alone. No lunch. Too proud to ask for help. When you've seen enough of the world, you learn to spot the signs. He let the silence sit for a beat, then added, almost in a whisper. No child should ever feel invisible. The story quickly spread, first through town, then far beyond. Local veterans showed up at Pinewood just to shake Sammy's hand. Old Marines from his former unit called in from across the country, sharing memories of Carter's rules, which, it turned out, were still being taught to new recruits. And through all of it, Samu didn't change. He showed up early. Kept the hallways clean. Left that same sandwich and water on the bench each morning for Leo, only now, they'd usually sit and eat together. One afternoon, as Samu was leaving school, a reporter caught up to him at the gate. "How does it feel to be called a hero?" she asked, thrusting a microphone toward him. He stopped and thought for a second. "I'm not the hero in this story," he said quietly. "That title belongs to Elijah Matthews. I just did what anyone with eyes and a conscience would have done, noticed a hungry kid." Then he turned and walked away, leaving the reporter standing there with a quote more profound than anything she expected. After that day, no one at Pinewood referred to him as the janitor anymore. To students and staff alike, he became Mr. Carter, the quiet man who watched over them all. The stone bench where he'd left so many meals took on new meaning. The PTA added a small bronze plaque that read, "Here, a man who said nothing made an entire battalion of Marines stand at attention." Teachers began using the plaque in their lessons, especially during discussions on kindness and character. "Real heroes don't need applause," Ms. Blake would tell her students. "They see a need, and simply step in to fill it." Leo began to change, too. The reserved, withdrawn boy slowly started to come alive. He smiled more. He began answering questions in class. He even joined the school's science club, something no one expected. Each morning, Leo started showing up early, not just for food, but to help Samu with the little tasks. Holding open trash bags. Wiping lunch tables. Sorting the tool shelf. No one asked him to. It just became part of their rhythm. Samu still brought extra food. But now, instead of dropping it and walking away, he and Leo sat on the bench and ate together, sometimes chatting about class, sometimes about cars, sometimes not talking at all. One morning, Leo looked up from his sandwich and asked, "How does a transmission work?" Samu chuckled, grabbed a stick, and started sketching diagrams in the dirt, simple, clear, patient. His explanation was so engaging that other students began gathering around. Before long, Samu's lunch breaks turned into mini mechanics workshops, informal, but full of learning. And the Marines didn't forget, either. Members of Elijah Matthews's old unit set up a rotation. Every month, someone came by the school to check in on Leo and his mom. They helped with house repairs. Gave Laura rides to job interviews until she found stable work. Made sure Leo never felt like he'd been forgotten. Captain Alvarez even returned for the school's Veterans Day assembly. Despite his usual resistance to public attention, Samu agreed to stand alongside the other veterans. A photo from that day, Samu and Leo side by side, both wearing slightly oversized Marine Corps hats, was used as the face of a regional campaign to support veterans and their families. Laura Matthews found her own peace, slowly. For that first year after Elijah died, she told Samu one evening over Sunday dinner at his apartment, now a quiet tradition between them, "I boxed up everything about his service. Put it all away. I thought it'd be easier if Leo didn't know too much." She sighed and shook her head. "I was wrong." Samu nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief does that," he said. "It makes us think hiding the truth protects people. But kids, they need honesty. They need something real to hold on to." Laura gave him a soft smile. "You didn't just give him food, Samu. You gave him a bridge to his father. And you didn't even know." Samu gave a quiet nod, the weight in his eyes matching the understanding in his voice. "Grief makes us do strange things. But kids, they need the truth, gently, honestly, and when they're ready to hear it." Laura smiled softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave him more than food, Samu. You gave him a piece of his father. And you didn't even know you were doing it. But the biggest change wasn't in Leo, or even in the community. It was in Samuel himself. The man who had spent most of his life moving through the world quietly, shoulders heavy with memories and silence, began to open up. At Principal Harris's urging, he designed a basic vehicle maintenance class for the middle school, something small, hands-on, but rooted in much more than nuts and bolts. He taught the students how to check tire pressure and change oil, but he also taught them about showing up on time, double-checking their work, and looking out for people who might not ask for help. Thoroughness. Responsibility. Awareness. Simple principles, grounded in experience, but delivered with care. 6 months after the Marine's visit, Samuel received a letter with an official seal. It was from the Commandant of the Marine Corps. His guidelines, Carter's rules, had been formally adopted into the official training manual for Marine transport units. What had once been just survival instincts, sharpened in the chaos of war and carried quietly through decades, would now shape the thinking of future generations. When asked how he felt about the recognition, Samuel gave the same kind of answer he always did, humble and to the point. They were never really my rules. Just common sense you learn when lives are in your hands. Check your vehicle. Pay attention to the road. And never forget who's riding with you. Exactly 1 year after the Marines arrived at Pinewood, the school held a small ceremony to mark the anniversary. Students, teachers, parents, and veterans gathered at the far end of the schoolyard, where a new memorial garden had been planted. At its center stood the now famous stone bench, no longer just a quiet corner, but a symbol of something lasting. A flagpole rose beside it, flying both the American flag and the Marine Corps standard. Leo, now noticeably taller and standing with calm confidence, stood shoulder to shoulder with Samuel as Principal Harris unveiled the name. The Matthews Carter Friendship Garden. She looked out at the crowd and spoke clearly. Two Marines who never met, brought together by duty, by kindness, and by a silent promise. Heroism doesn't always wear medals or march in parades. Sometimes, it looks like an ordinary person doing what's right, when no one's watching. To this day, Samuel still works at Pinewood Elementary. He still shows up before the sun rises. Still makes sure everything's clean, fixed, and ready for the day. Still leaves room on the bench, for whoever needs it. That old stone seat has become something more than furniture. It's a safe place, for kids who feel overwhelmed, out of place, or just in need of a quiet moment. No forms to fill out. No program to join. Just a kind man who notices when someone needs a little bit of peace. When an education consultant once asked Samuel about his approach to supporting struggling students, he gave a response that the staff later printed, framed, and hung on the break room wall. I figure everyone's fighting something we can't see. A sandwich and a few minutes of peace might not solve it. But it tells them they're not fighting alone. Have you ever seen someone show quiet kindness without needing a thank you? Think back to a time when a small gesture felt bigger than it looked. Because sometimes, even a humble meal can carry the weight of a medal of honor. Subscribe to Uncovered Tales, where it's not the loudest voices that make history, it's the ones whispered in gratitude across generations.